A keycard that opens the wrong room feels like a harmless bug until you see the pattern. Hotels call it a programming error. Locks call it green and open. People who plan around it call it an opportunity. I learned that the hard way, 4 different nights, in 4 different buildings that swore my door was mine alone. Conference week, downtown tower, the kind of lobby with too much brass for a weekday. Check-in took forever. The clerk slid 2 cards into a paper sleeve and circled 1414. I rode up with a knot of people who smelled like airline air and coffee. On 14 I turned right out of the elevator, counted 4 doors, and held my card to 1416 by mistake. It chirped green. I pulled the handle and met a suitcase, shoes by the wall, a TV breathing a hotel channel loop. I froze, shut the door, and took 2 steps back the way you do when you've just looked through a stranger's curtains. Then I tried my actual door. 1414 chirped green too. My card opened both. I went straight back down. The clerk's eyebrows climbed, fell, and then turned into apology. He said it happens sometimes when a connecting room pairing hangs in the system from a previous guest, like a ghost reservation. He re-encoded, handed me new cards, deactivated the old, and comped a snack. I believed him enough to go back up and latch the swing bar. At 1:23 a.m., my handle moved with the quiet confidence of someone who expected to feel air. The bar caught. A second of pressure, then nothing. I called the desk. Security knocked 10 minutes later, checked the floor cameras, and offered to walk me down to see the lock audit. On a little gray screen behind the desk they pulled my door in 1416. There it was in plain text, 11:52 p.m., my card ID used at 1416 and 1414 within 2 minutes. At 1:23 a.m., a different card tried 1414, green granted, then blocked by bar. 12 seconds later, the same card tried 1416 and red failed. The officer said, evenly, that green at a door means the lock recognized an allowed card, not that the system made a mistake. Someone had access to both. He asked if anyone at check-in had heard my name or seen the room number on the sleeve. I remembered a man 2 places behind me, the way he leaned to see which elevator I took, the way he pretended to check his phone until mine dinged. The camera on 14 caught him walking the hall at 1:22, passing my door, doubling back, trying, then shrugging like a man who just discovered a bar he didn't expect. He tapped 1416, shook his head at the red, and rode down. The clerk's ghost pairing story might have been true in the morning. At night, someone used the leftover pairing like a spare key. Security moved me to another floor and printed me a copy of the audit with the card IDs blacked out. I kept it. Months later it happened again on an interstate run when I was too tired to be picky. Small chain, 3 floors, breakfast waffle iron as a selling point. The night auditor gave me 327. I dragged my bag up, found 327, tried the card, got red. I swiped again, same red. I slid 2 doors down to 329 out of habit because numbers get slippery at 2 in the morning. Green. I pushed in on darkness and the clean smell of someone else's soap. The bathroom fan was on. A garment bag hung from the closet rail. I backed out, heart drumming low, and stopped in the hall with my hand still on the handle like the door might argue. Then my own door, 327, opened green on the first try. I went downstairs and told the auditor everything. He apologized twice, looked rattled, made me new cards, and promised to check 329's lock in the morning with maintenance. Back in 327 I slid the deadbolt and the bar and folded the ironing board against the door for theater. At 2:06 someone tried my handle. The light on the lock blinked green against the peephole. The bar caught. A pause, a sigh you could almost call polite, and the sound of socks retreating. I called the desk from the floor. The auditor told me no one else had checked in, that 329 was occupied and asleep, and that he'd call security. At 10 the next morning I asked to see the lock audit because now I knew what to ask for. The manager walked me to the back, printed a sheet, and tapped the columns like a teacher. My key ID had registered green at 329 before midnight. It had also registered green at 327. The person who tried my door at 2 had used a different key ID that the system labeled as 329's active guest card. We knocked on 329 at noon with housekeeping. A woman answered, annoyed and scared in equal parts. She said someone had jiggled her handle overnight too. Her card opened my door when the manager tested it. Not a glitch. The manager said the encoder had been in training mode earlier in the evening for a team orientation and, if you weren't careful, it would pair adjacent rooms as if they were connecting. He said it should have been impossible, then he stopped saying that and comped both rooms. We all stood there in the hall, 3 people who didn't sleep, looking at a printout that said our plastic didn't care which number we were promised. Before we split, the woman from 329 mentioned a man who'd been hanging near the business center when she checked in, the way he asked the auditor what rooms on 3 were, quiet and not near ice. When I looked around the lobby I saw him at the breakfast counter pouring batter, watching the printer behind the desk spit wake-up lists. He glanced at me just long enough to make my skin know it wasn't dairy making my stomach tight. The manager changed every card on the 3rd floor and posted a handwritten sign by the encoder that just said no training after 5 p.m. Someone had taught the night a trick. We had walked into its rehearsal. 3rd time felt like proof, not coincidence. Boutique hotel, wood floors, a key fob instead of a card. The clerk at check-in offered mobile keys through the app, but I asked for plastic anyway because phones die and plastic never does when it needs you. Room 508, 5th floor, a mural in the hall that looked expensive and sad. I walked right past 508 without thinking, stopped at 506 because the runner on the floor did that thing where it resets your count, held the fob to the reader, and watched it blush green. The handle gave. I pushed into air and music from someone's laptop, the scent of shampoo. I backed out, quiet like an apology. My own door, 508, went green too. I barred and bolted and called the desk. The night agent sounded like he'd inherited a problem from an afternoon he didn't work. He asked me to come down, and I did because my room felt like an answer to the wrong question. In the back office a technician scrolled through tiny lines of a lock audit while my coffee went cold. He tapped a column. At 9:14 p.m., my fob ID had opened 506. At 9:16, it opened 508. At 12:32 a.m., a different fob ID had greened my 508 and met the swing bar. At 12:33, that same fob had tried 506 and gotten red. The agent said softly, that second fob belongs to 506. The tech said less softly, 2 rooms on 1 fob doesn't happen by itself. He asked who was at the desk when I checked in. I told him. He asked if anyone stood close enough to see the paper sleeve with my room penciled on it. I could remember a woman in a blazer balancing a tablet, a man with a rolling case asking for extra keys because his partner was still upstairs, a bellman whose smile didn't move his eyes. The tech pulled video from the hallway. It showed a guest step off the elevator at 12:31, stand 3 doors down with his phone up like he was checking signal, then try my handle and, when it hit the bar, drift to 506 and fail. We went up together, knocked on 506 with security. The man answered in socks and a shirt he'd slept in. He looked genuinely confused when the agent asked to test his fob on my door. His card blinked green there too. He kept apologizing without knowing who deserved the apology. The agent re-encoded both rooms, new profiles, fresh numbers, deactivated the old. On the way down the tech showed me the setting he thought someone had tripped by habit, an adjoining flag in the PMS that pairs 2 rooms as a suite for 1 reservation. If you don't clear it, the next check-in can inherit both locks if a clerk taps too fast. He said they'd turn that flag off building-wide until training caught up. He didn't say what I kept thinking, someone on the floor had known to test both handles like he was fishing for leftovers. The 4th was the one that made me start asking to see audits before I unpacked. Airport hotel, long corridors, housekeeping carts like parade floats parked nose to tail. I was bone tired, the kind of fatigue you mistake for calm. 1129 was my number. I rode up with a couple in vacation shorts and a man whose badge hung from a lanyard that said something about facilities in a font only a printer would love. My door opened on the first try. So did 1131 when my hand, drunk on repetition, hit the wrong reader. I didn't step in. I closed it gently and checked the number twice like counting to make lightning behave. Then I went to 1129 and locked the bar and the deadbolt and the language in my brain that says trust the pattern. At 2:14 a.m., the handle twitched and the light blinked green. The bar caught. A murmur through the wood, not a voice I could quote later, more like the sound a person makes when they rehearse being surprised. I called the desk. 10 minutes later a supervisor and a security officer walked me down to the back office again, because by then the back office felt like a second room where sleep also refused me. The audit showed my fob ID at 11:31 before midnight and at 11:29 within the same minute. At 2:14 a.m., a card tied to 11:31 had greened my door and been stopped by the bar. At 2:15, a different card, labeled service in a way that made my stomach do math, had red failed both. We knocked on 11:31. A man answered, hair stuck to his temple, eyes tired but polite. He said his card had opened my room when he'd first arrived, that he'd closed it quick and told himself he'd misread the numbers. He added that half an hour earlier, someone in a polo had tried his handle and then smiled through the peephole when he said hello. The supervisor's shoulders changed shape at that. He keyed 1131's lock to maintenance mode, read the last entries, and frowned. A service card had touched the reader 3 times in 1 minute earlier in the evening and failed. The officer radioed downstairs, asked who had service cards on nights. 3 names came back. 2 were in the office. One was, floater for 11, a phrase that didn't calm me. We scrolled another camera. In the frame, a hallway, a cart, a body and a polo leaning just enough to block the door number while his hand sat at the lock as if he'd been invited. He never looked at the lens. He looked at the peephole. The supervisor made 2 calls I didn't hear. He gave 1131 a different room and comped both of us with the kind of smile that knows comp is vitamin C for a bone break. He told me something I hadn't been told before. When a service card touches your lock, the audit knows which card, not just that it was service. He said they would be taking that card back in the morning. He didn't have to say from whom. I slept with the TV making fake company I could control. What I tell people now is boring, and that's the point. Put the bar on even when you're just peeing. Ask for a re-encode if your card ever shows green on a door that isn't yours, and ask to see the audit because good hotels will show you. Don't say your room number out loud at the desk, and take the sleeve with you or black it out with a thumb. If someone tries your handle and you hear the soft click of green, call, even if you feel silly. None of these were ghosts in machines. They were the overlaps human systems create when they're tired or rushed or trained by people who assume the hallway is full of friends. A key that opens the wrong room isn't a cute story. It's a map someone else might already be following.